Alors, merci beaucoup tout le monde. Bon après-midi. We had a positive meeting with Ambassador Greer, Janice, Charette, and I, and a number of senior officials from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office. We had an opportunity to take stock of progress that had been made over the last number of weeks on a series of technical issues, and we presented a number of specific proposals to Ambassador Greer that we think are good in the broader context of the North American economy and respond to some long-standing issues that the United States has raised with us. I also had the opportunity to discuss with Ambassador Greer the letter that I sent to my American and Mexican counterparts yesterday, where I confirmed, as you know, that Canada would be ready to extend the CUSMA agreement by 16 years. We also looked ahead to July 1st and discussed what might be the course of our work on July 1st. Of course, Madame Charette and I raised the long-standing issues around sectoral tariffs on issues critical to the Canadian economy, automobiles, steel, aluminum, softwood lumber. Of course, we raised those issues with Ambassador Greer. We'll continue some further exchanges over the coming days this week. Ambassador Greer is leaving Washington soon. We agreed that he and I would be in touch again next week. And I reiterated to Ambassador Greer what the Prime Minister had said in New York last week, that a strong, prosperous Canadian economy is good for North America. And we discussed how we can work together on a number of issues that strengthen the competitiveness of the North American economy. Alors, ce fut une longue rencontre avec l'ambassadeur Greer, une rencontre qu'on a constatée était positive. Nous avons eu l'occasion de discuter le progrès réalisé au cours des dernières semaines. Il y a eu plusieurs conversations, Madame Charette avec son homologue, l'ambassadeur Getman. Il y a eu aussi récemment hier des discussions techniques assez détaillées. Alors nous avons pris connaissance du progrès que nous avons fait ensemble dans ce contexte-là. Et en se basant sur ces progrès, nous avons présenté à l'ambassadeur Greer une série de propositions spécifiques qui, de notre avis, sont bonnes pour l'économie nord-américaine et qui répondent aussi à des enjeux que les Américains ont soulevés avec le Canada depuis longtemps. Nous avons également eu l'occasion de discuter la lettre que j'ai transmise à l'ambassadeur Greer et au secrétaire Ebrard, dans laquelle nous confirmons la volonté du Canada de prolonger l'entente de l'ACUM de 16 ans. Nous avons finalement discuté ou abordé la question du 1er juillet et le travail et qu'est-ce que nous allons faire ensemble au cours des prochaines semaines. Bien sûr, nous avons soulevé et discuté les tarifs sectoriels qui présentement sont extrêmement difficiles pour les secteurs essentiels à l'économie canadienne. On parle évidemment du bois d'œuvre, de l'acier, de l'aluminium, des automobiles. Alors ça a été un sujet que nous avons abordé évidemment avec M. Greer. Et pour conclure, nous nous sommes mis d'accord sur d'autres conversations qui vont avoir au cours des prochains jours. L'ambassadeur Greer quitte Washington plus tard aujourd'hui et il sera de retour à la fin de la semaine et on a convenu de continuer notre discussion avec lui à ce moment-là. Alors ça résume un peu nos discussions et comme toujours, vous savez comment j'ai hâte à prendre vos questions. And with that, I know all of you know how excited I am, and I know Janice shares that excitement on this beautiful Washington spring day to take your questions. And thank you for being here at this magnificent embassy in Washington.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. So we'll start with Abigail Bimman and just try and get through as many people as possible. Please, we'll keep it to one question, one follow-up, and please state your outlet as well.
Abigail Beeman, CTV News. Thank you for taking our questions. You talked about raising your letter with Ambassador Greer and the 16-year request from Canada. After today's meeting, do you believe that that's attainable?
I'm eternally optimistic, Abigail. I think it's in the economic interest of North America to commit to that trilateral framework for another 16 years. We took stock of the work that the Americans want to do with Canada and the work that we're prepared to do over the coming weeks. I remain optimistic about the work that we can do with the Americans, but July 1st is a date where our trading partners will have something to say about that, and we have a lot of work to do between now and July 1st. And as Ambassador Greer said, after July 1st, the agreement remains in place. It falls to a 10-year term with annual reviews. What he said to us privately is not different than what he has said publicly, but I think all of us know that the road to conclusions in these conversations is sometimes not a straight line. You can suddenly hit clear air turbulence when you don't expect it, and sometimes you can have a very smooth ride with no turbulence. So I remain optimistic that we'll focus on the latter.
The messaging from the government in general seems to be that Mexico really isn't that far ahead. And I want to ask, with Mexico concluding one formal round of talks and two more scheduled, and Canada, as far as I yet know, not having any formal talks scheduled, how are we not behind?
So I obviously won't speak to the discussions that Mexico is having with the United States. We have said always that there will be bilateral conversations between the United States and Mexico, between Canada and the United States. That's what Madame Charette and I continued today. We are also having bilateral discussions with the Mexicans. I remain optimistic that there will be a conclusion by all three parties that the economic interest of North America is served by committing to what Ambassador Greer has previously publicly referred to as the load-bearing walls of their trade relationship with Canada and Mexico. Janice, do you want to add something to that?
Just, Minister, thank you. I think that one of the things we talked again with Ambassador Greer and his team again today was just how successful the USMCA agreement has been for all three of our countries, that we've seen the impact for farmers, for workers, for industries in Canada, the United States and Mexico. We've seen the bilateral trade that has increased, the trilateral trade that has increased as a result of the USMCA agreement, and the chance to kind of get to a position where as quickly as we can kind of replace the agreement, the stability and the certainty and the predictability that that agreement offers, and the importance of trying to get to there as quickly as possible.
Joshua Grove with Bloomberg. Thank you for taking the time, both of you, to do this. I wanted to ask, as these talks continue, the administration, as you know, is preparing potential Section 301 tariffs that might replace or increase the existing Section 122 tariffs that went in after the Supreme Court ruling. There's also been some discussion in Canada about whether Canada might brace for being impacted by Section 338 tariffs, retaliating on booze specifically. I wanted to know whether that came up in the meeting, and more specifically, if the U.S. does impose new tariffs, either 301, 338, or both, will Canada respond with tariffs, or will it defer that pending these talks?
So, Josh, thanks for the question. The last part of it was hypothetical. So you've been around a long time, so have I. We're not going to answer hypothetical questions about a potential response to a measure that we haven't seen. But the first part of your question obviously is something that we have been preparing for. It's not a surprise that the United States initiated these investigations. We have made submissions to the United States that we think are very significant in addressing the concerns that the United States has raised for a number of months or a number of conversations that we've had with the Americans. I would say that the conversation today helped the Americans understand our shared commitment to issues like, to use one obvious example, the question around forced labor and the fight against forced labor. It won't surprise you that we share the concern of the Americans and other economic partners that we need to do everything we can together to face this challenge.
Did you discuss also trade with China and the Canadian move to allow a limited number of Chinese vehicles into its market? Thank you.
So, like the hypothetical answer, Josh, you'll hear me say, and for your colleagues in line, we don't discuss publicly the content of private conversations or private discussions. The best way to get a deal that's in the interest of Canadian workers and Canadian businesses and the Canadian economy is to build up a level of confidence and trust with people like Ambassador Greer. And one of the things that in our first meeting many months ago we agreed is that we wouldn't discuss those things publicly. So that won't surprise you either, Josh. Thank you.
Adrian Moore with the Globe and Mail. Minister, you said that today you presented some proposals to Ambassador Greer. What did you propose?
So again, it's a perfect sequel to the question that Josh just asked. We're not going to discuss the details of those conversations. The Americans have for a long time publicly talked about trade concerns they have with all of their trading partners, not just Canada and Mexico, but other trading partners as well. And we arrived at the conversation today in Mr. Greer's office with, it's a continuation of work that's been done over many months. But sitting with Ambassador Greer at his office, we took the time to talk about specific issues that Canada, on which Canada can propose, we think, measures that should give the Americans a lot of comfort.
President Trump essentially froze talks with Canada in October. You know, now that you're talking to Greer and you're making concrete proposals and putting that on the table, are talks now unfrozen? And in that vein, how soon are we going to start having these more sort of formal USMCA discussions, you know, as the Americans are having with the Mexicans? How soon until Canada either joins that table or has its own separate table with the Americans doing the same thing?
So the first part of your second question was, are the talks unfrozen? The answer is yes. They've been unfrozen for a number of months. When I was here in March and had a face-to-face meeting with Ambassador Greer, I think I said at that time that we should consider that the pause of October is behind us. But there are also, like, I spent over an hour on Memorial Day Monday in a video meeting with Janice and Ambassador Greer and Ambassador Getman early on a holiday Monday. He was available 8 days ago to go in to a detailed conversation. Today was a continuation of that conversation last week. Janice has multiple times a week discussions with Ambassador Getman. And as I said yesterday, there were technical experts on specific issues that had fairly detailed meetings here in Washington. So consider them unfrozen. To your question about a formal technical table around a CUSMA review, we're doing a lot of that work now. The Americans have decided to publicly say that they're doing that work with the Mexicans. That doesn't surprise us in the sense that we always knew there would be these bilateral conversations. We had some with the Americans today. We had some a couple of weeks ago with the Mexicans. That's a continuation of an ongoing process.
Hi, David Lauder with Reuters News Service based here in Washington. Minister LeBlanc, thank you for taking our questions. In terms of like getting to maybe a more formal round of negotiations, do you have to resolve some of these issues first, such as the steel and aluminum tariffs, or getting some understanding on that before you sort of move to more full-on negotiations?
So, as I said in the opening comments, and maybe Janice, you wanted to add something, obviously we raised the sectoral tariffs, the steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, automobile tariffs in our conversation with Ambassador Greer, as we do all the time. But part of the CUSMA review process that's contemplated in the treaty itself requires us to take stock of elements that we would like to discuss on the July 1st review conversation. It follows up a letter that I sent to my Mexican counterpart and to Ambassador Greer yesterday. And we're prepared, and I've said this to Ambassador Greer, I've said it to Secretary Lutnick, with whom I also have an active ongoing conversation, that we are always looking at ways that we can reduce some of these trade concerns that the United States raise, the same way we want them to be reliable partners in that discussion with Canadian concerns as well.
Okay, and in the Mexican discussions that the U.S. had last week in Mexico City, one of the things that came out is a U.S. demand for automotive rules of origin to have half of the content of North American vehicles that qualify come from the U.S. And there's no apparent provision discussed for Canada at those talks. Do you expect to have to be included in that you'll have half maybe coming from Canada would be okay as well?
So, of course, we expect and are confident that as issues as important as changes, for example, to some of the rules of origin in a trilateral agreement, we are very confident that we will have those conversations with the Americans and the Mexicans as well. But Janice, on the specific automobile rules of origin, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Minister. I don't think it's really up to us at this point to comment on the conversations that are going on between the Mexican delegation and the USTR representatives. I will say that the work that under Minister LeBlanc's leadership we've been doing is really to try to focus on making progress, which is I think what we did today with colleagues from USTR, to resolve issues where it's in Canada's interest to do so, and that's been our focus. And we're not waiting for any kind of official process or anything to do those. We're doing that work and getting those things resolved. And then when the USTR folks and the Mexicans are at a point where they can turn to us, we'll be ready.
Thank you. Hi, Mike Crawley from CBC News. Minister LeBlanc, just a little more precision, if possible, from the question that Adrian asked. Have the Americans given you any indication of any obstacles before they're willing to say, hey, we're now in formal talks? If, for instance, have they said, you got to get the provinces to end the alcohol bans? What is stopping you from moving into the formal talks?
I wouldn't have been as absolutist as say that there's a stoppage from moving into the formal talks. This is part of a process. And again, you're characterizing, and I understand the characterization, the formal talks come with a joint news release and a joint social media post. I get that. But I also get that we have had substantive and detailed discussions over a number of weeks on all of those issues that people speculate are being discussed in other fora as well. So I am confident that we're doing the work necessary, as Janice said, and I appreciate that you want to reiterate in a terrific way, rephrase the question of your colleague earlier. Sadly, the answer is sort of the same. It would be exactly the same, but I don't remember the exact words. But we're not going to get into the details of that sort of level of detail. I think you used the word detail. I understand that. But sadly, this isn't the moment to get into that level of detail. The place to do that is across a table in a cordial, constructive conversation with the Americans and the Mexicans. And the good news is that's exactly what we did today.
Mr. Reggie Cicchini with Global News. You said you were optimistic. You acknowledge that the road ahead is going to have curves in it. It's not straightforward, but there is concern at home. So what advice or what scenarios should Canadian industry be preparing for if talks don't go well, which, yes, is a hypothetical, but assuming that this goes well is also a hypothetical?
And in this city, there are endless hypotheticals. So that's not new to this particular moment. We are obviously doing the work to prepare for any scenarios. As I said, recognizing that this trip has not been without some turbulence. We've all been in contexts where there's turbulence. You don't take your seatbelt off and run up and down the aisle and kick in the cockpit door. You remain focused on the work that you need to do, and you come through the turbulence very much focused on the outcome. To continue the analogy, that's to land safely. The outcome that we're looking for is one that's in the interest of Canadian workers and farmers and Canadian businesses. So that's the work we're doing. Today was an important step in the continuation of that work. On July 1st, as Ambassador Greer himself has said publicly, if there is no consensus amongst the three parties to extend for 16 years, the agreement remains in place for 10 more years, and there's a series of annual reviews. But all three countries could agree also on a different scenario and a renewal after July 1st. So I think we got to be careful not to set up a cliff that doesn't exist. But I do totally take the premise of your question about the uncertainty and concern that Canadian businesses have, Canadian workers have. That's why the government is always ready to look at ways to support those industries and those sectors, at the same time focusing on diversifying our trading relationships, building a more resilient economy at home, but doing the work necessary to come to an agreement with our most important trading partner and our neighbor, in whose capital we're standing today. Oh, Janice may want to add, please.
If I could. Thanks, Minister. I think that the other message I would say that we've been sharing with Canadian businesses, with farmers, with representatives from the labor associations is just how important it is for all of us to be making the case here in the United States and in Mexico on why a strong Canada is so essential for a strong, integrated, globally competitive North American economy. And we're joined together with them. We're fighting very hard in their interests, and their interests are in us getting to an outcome where we have the lowest possible tariffs on the narrowest basket of goods with the most market access for Canadian products, and that we do this in a way that preserves the value of the USMCA, and that is the carve-out or the exemption for USMCA compliant goods. And we're working very hard with our Mexican counterparts to make sure that, in their conversations, there's nothing that's going to happen in their bilateral agreement that undercuts any of the Canadian advantages. So I think, we know where we want to get to. We're working very hard with them on a shared plan to get there, and it's really important that we just keep up, and make sure that in this city where there's so many other issues running, that that the value of this agreement and the importance of this agreement for the United States and for Mexico is really clear.
Monsieur Leblanc, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada.
Mais Louis, j'ai trouvé ça vraiment bien. Je pensais à ça quand je vous ai vu en ligne d'attendre pour votre collègue francophone à la fin. Vous avez assuré qu'on va tout vider la ligne.
On pose les meilleures questions.
Tout vider la ligne de questions avant, parce qu'on n'aurait pas quitté sans prendre une question en français.
Voilà.
Alors, je suis content de vous voir, Louis.
Alors, les vraies réponses, exact. Monsieur Leblanc.
Il y a toujours des vraies réponses ici.
Aidez-nous à comprendre l'ambiance autour de la table. Je veux savoir si le Canada est en meilleure posture aujourd'hui, après la rencontre que vous avez eue après-midi, pour ce qui est des tarifs sectoriels notamment qui sont imposés au Canada. Est-ce que vous voyez le moindre progrès aujourd'hui après avoir passé une heure avec M. Greer?
L'ambiance, pour répondre précisément, Louis, à votre question, l'ambiance était cordiale. On a discuté des éléments assez personnels de nos plans au cours des prochaines semaines. M. Greer a partagé des moments personnels avec nous. C'était cordial, l'ambiance était positive. Les discussions étaient substantielles. On continue d'approfondir le niveau de détail dans les conversations. Et c'est ça qui est important. C'était pas une discussion à haut niveau. On a rentré dans les détails d'enjeux qui préoccupent les Américains. C'est des enjeux qui discutent publiquement. On a aussi abordé en détail des enjeux qui préoccupent le gouvernement du Canada, nos amis dans les provinces et les territoires, les secteurs de l'économie canadienne que vous connaissez bien. Moi, je suis optimiste de nature, Louis. Moi, j'ai laissé la réunion, peut-être Mme Charette pour ajouter quelque chose. Moi, j'ai laissé la réunion avec un sentiment qu'on a continué de renforcer la précision de nos conversations. Il y avait des éléments qui étaient nouveaux pour M. Greer dans nos conversations aujourd'hui. Sa réaction n'était pas négative, mais je sous-estime pas, je l'ai dit en anglais précédemment, je sous-estime pas les moments de turbulence qui pourront venir au cours des prochaines semaines, des prochains mois. On est dans une ville qui peut foncièrement être turbulente. Nous sommes face à des circonstances qui changent assez vite. Bonne nouvelle, on n'est pas paniqué par la turbulence. On ne va pas enlever notre ceinture, aller se promener dans l'allée, défoncer la porte du poste de pilotage, commencer à pousser les boutons devant les pilotes. On va demeurer concentré sur ce qui est important pour les travailleurs et l'économie canadienne. C'est ça que les Canadiennes et les Canadiens s'attendent de nous.
Et comment vous pouvez négocier sereinement si vous savez que vous allez peut-être avoir une autre vague de tarifs cet été, travaux forcés, etc.? Qu'est-ce que ça vaut les pourparlers qu'on a aujourd'hui quand vous savez qu'il y a peut-être une autre vague de tarifs qui s'en vient?
Parce que c'est peut-être un lien avec la réponse que je viens de donner. Louis, ça fera partie de la turbulence de ce voyage ici. Ça ne veut pas dire que face à cette possibilité-là, on refuse de discuter avec M. Greer, on refuse son invitation de venir à Washington aujourd'hui. On s'est convenu de se parler encore la semaine prochaine. Alors, la meilleure façon de gérer ces éléments imprévisibles, c'est précisément d'avoir un lien de confiance et direct avec des personnes comme M. Greer ou M. Lutnick. Et c'est le travail que je fais. Janice, voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose?
Juste une chose peut-être, M. le ministre, c'est-à-dire que nous avons vu hier soir des changements dans des États-Unis sur ces mesures tarifaires et en attendant, ça pourrait arriver n'importe quand. Et ça renforce pour nous l'importance de continuer le travail pour les persuader que l'échange avec le Canada, l'industrie Canada, les fermiers canadiens, les travailleurs, travailleuses canadiens, ils contribuent à une économie nord-américaine plus forte, plus compétitive, plus capable de se battre contre les autres économies. Et on prend rien pour acquis. Il faut continuer notre travail pour renforcer notre position et pour vraiment faire la bonne fête pour tous les Canadiens.
And we'll conclude with one question from Kelly Malone, Canadian Press.
Kelly Malone with the Canadian Press. Thanks so much. We saw your letter today. Did you receive a letter from your Mexican or American counterparts? And can you disclose what they indicated they want to do with the future of CUSMA?
So, two questions. Do you want me to take the first one first or the second one first? So,
Your choice.
So I'll start with your first question. Yes, we received letters from Ambassador Greer and Secretary Ebrard. And no, it's not up to us to disclose the contents of their letters. But we look forward to working with them on the many shared priorities that the correspondence revealed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Merci beaucoup. See you, Josh.
Of course.